Hi there. In this topic video, we're going to be exploring how you can use game theory in your A-level economics exams. Game theory is concerned with predicting the outcome of games of strategy in which the participants, for example, two or more businesses, have incomplete information about the other's intentions. And game theory analysis has direct relevance to the study of the conduct and behaviour of firms in oligopolistic markets. So, for example, the decisions that firms must take over their pricing, levels of production, and how much to spend on research and development. Now, there are many different topical examples of game theory that you can use. So, for example, we'll explore issues of tacit collusion between firms. Tacit collusion is where firms effectively agree not to compete. Not necessarily an explicit price fix, but, for example, price matching schemes. Firms in oligopolies are thinking about how much research spending and how much to commit to innovation. This represents obviously a risk for any business. But if one firm invests in R&D, can a rival firm decide not to follow? They might lose the competitive edge in the market and suffer a long-term fall in market share and profitability. At a macroeconomic level, the battle between central banks and currency speculators is essentially a game theory idea. And what about the economics of the labour market? The UK government's just introduced its own new national living wage. So how will firms respond to that? For example, the likely response of coffee shops such as Caffè Nero and Costa Coffee. Will they pay the living wage? Will they pay above it? What will they do to the other non-wage benefits for their employees? Game theory can also be applied to key decisions about whether to enter a market or perhaps whether to leave. And when we think about transport economics and, for example, firms bidding for a particular train operating franchise, again, the game theory aspects of auctions become really important. So game theory has an application in lots of different markets. In this presentation, I'm going to take you through 3 examples of game theory matrix tables that you can use in your exams. So if you have a moment during this presentation and you need to write something down, just press the pause button and we can wait for you. Here's the classic example of game theory. It's known as the prisoner's dilemma, and it's a situation where 2 prisoners are being questioned over their guilt or innocence of a crime. And they have a simple choice, either to confess to the crime, therefore implicating their accomplice, we call that the betray option, and therefore accept the consequences, or to stay silent, keep quiet, deny all involvement and hope that their partner does likewise. Stay silent or betray. The prisoner's dilemma is a classic example of basic game theory in action. Now the payoff in this game is measured in terms of months or years in prison arising from their choices, and this is summarised in the table on this slide. By the way, no communication is allowed between the 2 suspects. In other words, each must make their own independent decision, but clearly they're going to take into account the likely behaviour of the other when they're under interrogation. And that alone highlights the importance of uncertainty in an oligopoly. So what is the best strategy for both players? Well, the prisoner's dilemma game illustrates why it's actually difficult in real life to cooperate, even when it's in the best interests of both parties. The dominant strategy for both players in this game is to betray. That gives them the opportunity and the option of getting away scot-free. However, if they both betray, they're missing out on an equilibrium which would actually be better, and that of course is the cooperative equilibrium of staying silent. So in the prisoner's dilemma, the reward to defecting, in other words betraying, is greater than mutual cooperation, in other words staying silent. So what will happen? Well, typically firms will end up, 2 prisoners will end up, bottom right here, betraying each other and spending 5 years in the clink. If only they could have kept silent, they would have only had 6 months to endure. Let's see how this prisoner's dilemma type game translates to a simple pricing game. And in this example, we have 2 firms and they have to decide whether to set high or low prices. And the payoff this time is measured in terms of expected profit. Again, here, the incentive for the firm realistically is to set a low price. Because, for example, if firm A goes for low prices and firm B goes for high, then firm A will make $5 billion and firm B will make no profit at all. And likewise, if firm A sets a high price and firm B sets a low price. So the instinctive reaction of firms, the rational response, if you like, is to set low prices. They both make $1 billion. However, if they could both collude, they could both make $3 billion each. And that, of course, would be a higher level of profit. In this game, regardless of what the other firm decides to do, the best response of the other firm is to charge a low price. And it's likely that both these businesses would settle bottom right at $1 billion each. However, if they got together and decided to collude in some sort of price fixing agreement by both setting a high price, then they could earn higher total profits. Of course, once they've agreed to collude, they then have an incentive to break that agreement, because that would allow one firm to achieve a market advantage. It's interesting, I think, thinking about these kind of decisions in the context of real-world markets. And the example I'd like to use with you today is the current situation in the world oil market and the strategy being adopted by Saudi Arabia. Now, this is very complex, but I'll try and simplify it for you. Since 2010, the Saudi economy has significantly increased their supply of oil. The production levels per day have gone up from just over 8 billion barrels of oil per day to over 10 billion. Now, clearly one of the aims of this for the Saudi government is to effectively inflict some commercial damage on other oil producing countries, perhaps the Iranians, but also to challenge in a competitive sense the rapidly growing shale oil and gas market in the States. Of course, one of the consequences of a significant increase in oil supply, allied to a slowdown in oil demand from countries such as China, has been that the world price of oil has fallen very sharply from around the spring and summer of 2014 right through to the start of 2016. As this chart shows, the price of oil collapsed from over $100 per barrel down to less than $30. It's risen a little bit since, but effectively the price of oil is more than half what it was 2 years ago. Now, for Saudi, that fall in the price of oil might be useful in terms of inflicting losses on the shale oil producers in the States, but it does involve making a loss themselves. The estimated break-even price for Saudi for its oil is just over $100. So therefore, pumping oil out of the ground at a loss is clearly going to cause some significant fiscal damage for the Saudi authorities. We often see in oligopolies lots of quite intense but short-run price wars breaking out. And this effectively is a decision in game theoretic terms for businesses to start competing with each other, effectively defective strategies being chosen as opposed to mutual cooperation. So look out for really good examples in the news of price wars in airlines between the big supermarket retailers and price wars in mobile phones. Oftentimes, these price wars tend to be quite short run, but also very intensive, and then firms go back to settling on a more established price. Keep in mind also, please, that price wars, whilst in theory they're good news for the consumer in the short run, they also do have a significant effect on smaller businesses further down the supply chain. A report published in autumn 2015 found that small suppliers with less than 25 million annual turnover lacked the monopsony or the negotiating power of big firms. And as a result, their profit margins had fallen to just around 2%. This is really important. Price wars can often inflict significant damage on smaller businesses. Here's my third example of how you can use game theory in your A-level economics exams. One of the key aspects of oligopoly is the importance of non-price competition. And here's another simple example of how this might work. Two firms, A and B, and they have a simple decision to make about how much to spend on advertising. Do they go heavy on marketing spend, or do they go light? Effectively, they don't advertise at all. Now, this payoff could be in terms of, let's say, revenues from doing it. Well, the dominant strategy for these firms is to advertise, because, of course, if they don't advertise and the other firm does, their revenues will be significantly below that of their rival. So they'll both end up spending quite a lot on advertising, top left. In theory, of course, they could be better off by not advertising with each other, because you could argue that advertising in theory just basically is a zero-sum game. But here's an example of how in game theory there might be an incentive for both firms to go heavy on advertising spend. And we see this in the real world. These are the biggest advertising spenders in the UK in 2014. I've highlighted in orange sort of telecommunications companies, media companies like Sky and BT, Virgin Media and TalkTalk. They figure right up there in the top 15. Some of these companies spending more than £2 million a week on advertising. And other industries such as supermarkets and household goods figure prominently. So in this game theoretic sense, there's a strong incentive, perhaps a strong payoff to spend heavy on marketing, because your rivals will be doing likewise. Just want to say a few words about another important aspect of game theory, and that's the concept of first mover advantage. So first mover is the advantage that a business gets from being pretty much an early entrant into a particular sector. Amazon Web Services, for example, is a great example to use a first mover advantage, almost created by accident because they were fed up with their own infrastructure providers, so they set up their own business. And it's now a huge part of Amazon and the most profitable. Here are some other examples of potential first mover. So in the market for home delivery of fast food, Just Eat was pretty much the first in and has a significant advantage. Golden Leaf, intriguingly, is a major provider of cannabis products. And if cannabis is legalized in more countries, they may stand to benefit. What about Oculus Rift in virtual reality headsets? And many of you will use Spotify, one of the key major music streaming businesses that has been in the market for some time. So what are the advantages of being a first mover? Well, this is where you can bring in some really good analysis to go with your classic game theory. A business that's first into the market can oftentimes develop a significant advantage just by learning by doing, by making mistakes, learning from them, moving down their cost curve, and therefore making it harder and more difficult and costly for new firms to successfully enter the market. Crucially, if you're first in the market, you can achieve internal economies of scale, which brings down your unit costs, and also make some progress in building up that all-important consumer loyalty. Consumer behaviour can become habitual, and once that does, the cross-price elasticity goes down. It's much harder for new firms to come in. So those are the advantages of being a first mover, but also you'll have to evaluate, of course. And here are some possible first mover disadvantages. So if you get a question on game theory and you want to explore the gains from being a first mover, be able to evaluate some of the risks and the disadvantages as well. So, for example, employees who go with the first mover may decide to leave to set up a challenger brand, and they might take some of their human intellectual capital with them. The failure rate for first mover firms is often very high, partly because they don't generate sufficient revenue to cover their costs. Second movers can often learn from the mistakes of first movers. And a good example of that is a business such as Dropbox, which by some estimates was more than the 30th firm into the kind of file sharing, streaming website business. My evaluation point is that actually first scaler advantage is probably more important than first mover advantage. If you get to scale, then you'll have a significant competitive position. So when we think about game theory becomes relevant to analysing businesses when there are actually relatively few firms in the market. Standard game theory assumes that rational agents are looking to maximise their own self-interest. But actually, as we learn more about game theory, we're starting to see how cooperative, collaborative behaviour is working through. Many businesses now, for example, are involved in joint ventures. My key point in terms of evaluation is that game theory, and particularly the two-product, two-price decision that you're often using in A-level, game theory is actually an oversimplification of what truly is a very complex world. Indeed, when there are more than two rival firms in the market, for example in an oligopoly, the degree of complexity increases significantly, and many firms actually just fall back on rules of thumb or heuristics when setting their prices. Here are some examples of some game theory concepts. You may not need necessarily all of these for your A-level exam. And if you want to write down a definition, just press the pause button, and that will do nicely for you. Okay, so this has been a topic video, just looking at some of the ways in which you can use game theory in your A-level economics exams. Hope you found it useful. Check out our website and our YouTube channel for more economics videos.